A very good morning to all my students. Welcome once again to your Lordship, the premier online judiciary coaching institute and the first ever fully live online classes. So today I intend to discuss one of the most and significant doctrine of the Civil Procedure Code, and the doctrine is res sub judice, that is enshrined under section 10 of CPC. So let me first share the screen. Well, what is res sub judice? Now, in the previous lecture, I have already delivered a lecture on section 9, that is suits of civil nature. So this doctrine is very much intermingled. This doctrine is very much intermingled with the concept of section 9. So whenever we intend to read this doctrine, we have to read this doctrine in conjunction with section 9 and section 26 subsection 2 of CPC. Now, what is res sub judice? So first I will take you to the slide, that is section 9. Section 9 reads, no court shall proceed with the trial of any suit in which the matter in issue is also directly and substantial in issue in a previously instituted suit between the same parties or between the parties under whom they or any of them claim litigating under the same title, where such suit is pending in the same or any other court in India having jurisdiction to grant the relief claimed, or in any court beyond the limits of India established or continued by the central government and having like jurisdictions or before the Supreme Court. And the explanation that is attached to section 9 talks about the pendency of a suit in a foreign court does not preclude the courts in India from trying a suit founded on the same cause of action. Now, here the court is, see the court, no court shall proceed. So which court we are talking about? Here the court I've already told you in the previous lecture that according to the BAC Act, that is the Bengal Agra Assam Civil Codes Act, BAC Act 1887, it has already beautifully incorporated the categories of classes of civil code. So the first civil code is the court of Munsif. Just above court of Munsif, the court of civil judge, and just above court of civil judge was the court of additional judge, and just above the court of additional judge is the court of district judge. So the court of additional judge that we are talking about is the court of additional district and the additional district judge. So Nidhi, what happened? You have raised your hand.
Ma'am, please repeat the court's heredity.
Okay, the hierarchy of court. So I told you, according to the Bengal Agra Assam Civil Code Act of 1887, it was first, there were 4 category of classes of court. The first, the lowest court was the court of Munsif. Just above, it was the court of civil judge. And just above that, the court of additional judge and the court of district judge. So the court of additional judge that we are talking about, it is the court of additional district judge. Now the court of civil judge and the court of Munsif was redesignated as the civil judge senior division, that is a court of civil judge, and the Munsif is the civil judge junior division. So once you clear the judiciary examination, so definitely if you are selected on the civil side, the first post you will get is civil judge junior division. So the court of civil judge was redesignated as a court of Senior division, that is a civil court senior division, and the civil judge junior division. Now, the court shall proceed with the trial of any suit. I told you the word suit or the term suit is nowhere defined in the code. So for the definition of the code, you have to refer to one of the case, that is Hansraj Gupta versus Official Liquidator, Dehradun Mysore Electric Tramway Company Limited. So what the word suit means, the word suit is a civil proceeding that gets, that is commenced by the presentation of a plaint. So the no court shall proceed with the trial of any suits. It starts with a negative impact. It is a mandatory provision. So here, no discretion is actually left with the. So no court shall proceed with the trial of any suit in which the matter in issue. So the matter in issue that it talks about, that is the matter in dispute. So one party, what is matters in controversy or fact in issue? So one party is alleging and the other party is denying. So here the court will apply judicial mind and will adjudicate the matter in dispute and will settle it by passing the judgment. So let us first go to the conditions of stay of suit. Then I will explain in details at what the Bare Act provision states. The first condition is that there must be two suits in order to apply res sub judice to a particular fact. We have to look into the 6 conditions. So the first condition is there must be two suits. One is the previously instituted suit and the other is a subsequently instituted suit. Remember, my students, section 10 that we are talking about, that is a stay of suit, I told you it has to be read in conjunction with section 9 along with section 26 subsection 2 of CPC. So section 10 is basically a mandatory provision and it is a procedural in nature. Now, when I say it's a procedural in nature, it means that this section 10 can actually be waived by the parties to the litigation. Now, when we say the parties can waive it, it means that one suit has been previously instituted with respect to the same subject matter, with respect to the same cause of action, between the same parties, and the parties must be litigating under the same title, and both the court where the previously suit has been instituted and where the subsequently suit has been instituted, both the court should have the jurisdiction to try that matter. And both the suits are to be treated as suits. Why is it so? Now, when I told you that both the suits, that is a one previously instituted suit and the other subsequently instituted suit, has to be in relation to a suit itself. They are to be suits. What does it mean? For example, one suit is filed for ejectment and the other is a proceeding for fixation of a fair rent. So one previously instituted is talking about the ejectment. And the other suit is talking about not a suit, it's a proceeding for fixation of a fair rent. So here, one suit that previously instituted is a suit, but the subsequently instituted is not a suit, but it's a proceeding. So here what happens? Here section 10 will not be applicable. Section 10 will not get attracted. So there must be two suits. Second, the matter in issue in the subsequent suit is directly and substantially in issue in the previously instituted suit. Now, what does it mean? Here we are coming across two important terms. The first term is a directly and the second term is substantially. Now, what do you mean by directly? Directly means it has to be immediate. It has to be direct without any kind of intervention. So that is directly. Common parlance meaning. Substantially, it means material. Now, basically, there are two aspects. The first aspect that talks about the directly and substantial in issue. And the second aspect talks about the matter which is collaterally and incidental in issue. Now, this matter which is directly and substantial in issue can be further subdivided into two. First, actually in issue, and the second is constructively in issue. So the actually in issue, constructively in issue, we will deal with, the chapter that deals with another doctrine, that is res judicata. So next, part of my video, I will start with res judicata, that is enshrined in section 11. So directly and substantial in issue, I will try to interpret this particular, this aspect with the help of an illustration. Now, when can you say in a particular matter that the matter in issue is directly and substantial in issue? The first illustration I'll give, for example, A files a suit against B. That is, A sues B for rent due. So, A is the landlord and B is the tenant. So, A sues B for the rent due. And B took the defense that no rent is due. So the claim here, the important claim, is all about the rent due. So this rent due is directly and substantially in issue. I'll take you to another illustration. A sues B for rent due and B pleads an abatement of rent. I repeat again. A sues B for rent due and B pleads for an abatement of rent, saying that I will not give you the rent just because the area which B is actually enjoying is much less than the actual area which is there in the lease deed. And the court found that no, the area is perfect. Whatever is mentioned in lease deed, it is same area he is actually enjoying. So the finding as to the excess area is not the matter in issue, which is directly and substantially in issue, but it is a matter which is subsidiary, which is incidentally, which is collateral in issue. So the immediate matter or the material matter which is in issue is the rent due. So here, the difference lies between the directly and substantial in issue and the matter which is collateral and incidental in issue. Now, coming to the third point, the parties in both the suits are the same. So both the parties, so I don't think there's much difficulty in understanding this condition. So both the parties must be same. So for example, a previously instituted suit, or you can say an earlier suit, was filed by the wife for seeking the custody of a child. I repeat again. The wife in the earlier suit, she has filed a suit for seeking the custody of her son. Now the husband also filed another subsequent suit seeking an appointment as guardian of his son and also the interim relief regarding the custody of the child. So my students, the earlier suit is talking about such a matter in issue. That matter in issue is substantially and directly the same in the subsequent suit also. So when I'm talking about the directly and substantial in issue from this particular illustration, you can see that the wife has filed a suit, the earlier suit, for seeking the custody of the child. And the husband has also filed the subsequent suit for seeking the appointment of his guardianship in respect of this son. And also he demands an interim relief with respect to the custody of the child. So the matter in issue is directly and substantially the same in both the issues. So here you can say that here section 10 will get attracted. Now my students, now in both the suit, I'll give you an example. In both the suit, if one issue is same, I repeat again, in both the suits, there is only one issue which is same. So only because this one issue is same in both the suits, it would not attract section 10. I'll give you an example. Where a suit is filed for recovery of a rent for a period. So I filed a suit for recovering the rent from my tenant for a period. That would not attract section 10 of CPC to stay a suit for recovery of rent for a subsequent period. Here what is happening? The earlier suit is respect for a period and the subsequent suit is for a subsequent period. So here, though the one issue is same, that is a rent due, but the period is different. So here what is happening? The section 10 will not get attracted. Similarly, I'll give you another illustration. The plaintiff has filed a suit for eviction of his tenant on the ground of reasonable requirement. Okay. And another subsequent suit is filed, for evicting the tenant on the ground of default. So my question to y'all, that will section 10 will be applicable in this particular illustration? Can anybody just raise your hand? Shall I repeat it again, my students?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm saying that the plaintiff has filed a suit for eviction on the ground of reasonable requirement. And he also files another suit for eviction on the ground of default. So my question to you all is that whether the subsequent suit is on the same cause of action? The answer is no. The subsequent suit is not on the same cause of action. So here what is happening? Section 10 will not be applicable. So the cause of action is one for reasonable requirement and the other subsequent suit cause of action is for default. So though the issues in both the suit might be, one particular issue might be only one same, but what is happening, if you want to get, section 10 to be attracted in a particular fact, in a particular situation, you have to see that whether the decision in a previously instituted suit would operate as a res judicata in the subsequent suit or not. And if the answer is in the affirmative, then the subsequent suit would be stayed under section 10. So that is the test or the yardstick for determining that whether section 10 will be applicable in a given situation or not. Now coming to the fourth condition, both must be pending in courts in India, outside India, established under the authority of central government. So I told you, my students, that what is important is that the jurisdictional aspect. Remember section 9? The court shall have jurisdiction to try all suits of civil nature except whose cognizance is either expressly or impliedly barred. So this is what section 9 talks about. So here also you have to see that whether the previously instituted suit, where the court in which the previously suit has been instituted, whether it has the jurisdiction to try that matter or not. So if the previously suit or the court in which the previously suit has been instituted does not have the jurisdiction, the pecuniary jurisdiction to try that matter, so definitely section 10 will not be applicable. In respect, that is, the subsequent suit will not get stayed. So here what has happened, the jurisdiction is important, and then it is talking about both the suit must be pending in courts in India. That is a jurisdiction the courts should have. Either it has to be in India or it can be outside India, but not foreign court. So in foreign land also, if an Indian court is there, Indian court, what do you mean by Indian court? That has to be established and that has to be constituted and it has to be under the control of the central government. So in that case, definitely the suits will, the section 10 will get attracted. Fifth point, I told you, the court in which the first suit is instituted is a court having jurisdiction or competent to grant the relief claimed in the subsequently instituted suit. That is talking about the jurisdictional aspect. If the first court does not have the jurisdiction, then section 10 will not be attractive. So the subsequent suit will definitely go, it will proceed with the case. The court will proceed with the matter. Sixth, such parties must be litigating under the same title in both the suit. It is talking about the capacity. Now, these are the conditions of res sub judice. Now, I will take you to the bare provision. I hope now the bare provisions will be clear to you all. No court shall proceed with the trial of any suit. That is, it is a mandatory provision. In most of the prelims examination, they ask you that whether section 10 and 11 are discretionary, mandatory, directionary. So these are the question that comes. So you have to just tick. You have to tick on the particular answer, that is, it is mandatory. So always remember, no court shall proceed with the trial of any suit. It talks about section 10 and section 11. That is, talks about res judicata. It is a mandatory provision. It is a procedural in nature. So no court shall proceed with the trial of any suit. So no discretion is left with the court in which the matter in issue is also directly and substantially in issue in a previously instituted suit between the same parties or between the parties under whom they or any of them claim litigating under the same title, where such suit is pending in the same or in any other court in India having the jurisdiction to grant the relief claimed, or in any court beyond the limits of India, but that has to be established and constituted by the central government. So I hope now the bare act provision, if you compare with the conditions, I've already explained the condition in detail. Now the bare act is clear. Now my students, when I'm saying that you need to file an application for stay of suit. Now which suit I am talking about? Which suit needs to be stayed? So I told you in the condition, the first condition, there has to be two suits. The first is the previously instituted suit and the other is a subsequently instituted suit. Now, which suit needs to be stayed? That is the latter suit. That is the subsequently instituted suit. Now, the question is that is there any stage, at which the stay may be granted? So remember, my students, if the conditions that I have discussed just now in details, if the conditions that are enshrined under section 10 are fulfilled, then the applications for stay may be granted at any stage of the suit, and that too even before the filing of the written statement. Now the general rule is that the latter suit may be stayed, or the application for stay is to be decided. Normally, the application for stay is to be decided after the filing of the written statement. Why is it so? I'm saying the logic is very simple, because after the filing of the written statement, that's a reply from the side of the defendant. So after filing of the written statement, the court is in a position to know that whether the matter in issue is directly and substantially the same in both the suits or not. So it is very helpful in this particular area, whether the section 10 will be applicable or not. So there is no stage. Even at any particular point of time, it can be entertained, but normally it is to be decided after filing of the written statement. But sometimes it so happen, I told you, even it can be entertained, the application for stays to be decided even before the filing of the written statement. But there is one procedure. The procedure is that the defendant who wants to stay it has to show, has to supply with the copy of the plaint of the earlier suit. So if the defendant supplies the copy of the plaint of the earlier suit, then definitely it will be very much helpful for the court to ascertain, to determine that what is the dispute between the parties. So if from that particular plaint, from that copy of the plaint of the earlier suit, if the court can ascertain that yes, this is exactly the dispute between the parties, then definitely he can stay it. But if the court is in a dilemma, that the court is not very pretty sure, it's very unsure, or he's not very certain, so in that case the court can actually postpone it, and he will fix the matter, that is for deciding the application for stay after the filing of the written statement. So at the state at which the stay may be granted, this is a very important question that is asked in prelims. So it can be the application for stay can be decided at any stage, even before the filing of the written statement, but normally the rule is that after filing of the written statement. But before the filing of the written statement, you have to adhere to the procedure. So after adhering to the procedure, that is also not enough. The court, you have to convince the mind of the jury, you have to convince the court, and the court has to be sure that yes, what is the dispute all about between the parties. So if he can make out the dispute, then definitely he can entertain the application for stay even before the filing of the written statement. Then, coming to the explanation part, the pendency of a suit in a foreign court does not preclude the courts in India from trying a suit founded on the same cause of action. So, the cause of action, I have already told you in the first demo lecture of mine that I've given on the topic section 9, that what is exactly cause of action. The cause of action has been beautifully incorporated in the landmark judgment of Bharat Aluminium Company versus Kaiser Aluminium Technical Services. Now in that case, the judge has opined that the cause of action must be live. It must not be dead. It should not be in the womb. And 175 para of the same authority also states that it should not be, that is, the cause of action should not be speculative, it should not be contingent. So it means that if a plaint does not disclose the cause of action, then the plaint can be rejected at the threshold, that is enshrined under Order 7, Rule 11, Clause A of CPC. So if you only file a suit of temporary injunction, so definitely it is not maintainable. So that is the cause of action. Now, what explanation that is attached to section 10 talks about? That is, the pendency of a suit in a foreign court does not preclude the courts in India. Now, for example, if a particular matter is pending in a foreign court. Now, what is foreign court? That is in section 13 of CPC. It is enshrined in section 13 of CPC. Foreign court is matlab that court should not be constituted and established and continued by the central government of India. So here what is happening, if a matter is pending in a foreign court, definitely that will not that will not put a bar on the Indian court to try the matter, even if in both the suits, the matter which is there in the foreign court and the matter which is subsequently instituted in the Indian court, both the matter is directly and substantially the same. So that is not a bar. Now, coming to the scope. Res sub judice is a part of res judicata. Res sub judice is a Latin term which is not mentioned anywhere in Code of Civil Procedure. Res sub judice alludes to an issue pending preliminary and works as a bar to a preliminary of a suit which is pending decision in a formally founded suit. Now, my students, the heading of section 10, it talks about the stay of suit. It doesn't bars the institution of a suit, but it rather bars the trial of a suit. Now, what does it mean? Now, once the matter has been instituted in court A, you can definitely, with the same subject matter, with the same cause of action, same parties, same title, same relief, you can file another case in court B. So here, section 10 is not barring the institution. So what section 10 bars? It exactly bars the trial. So the subsequent court cannot go and decide the matter with respect to the merit of the case. But if the subsequent suit is to be decided purely on legal points, then section 10 will not be applicable. So it bars the trial and it does not bar the institution. It means the court, that is the subsequent court, has the power to pass any interlocutory orders or any kind of interim orders, like, the grant of injunction, appointment of receiver, attachment before judgment. Now, what happens exactly in interim orders, passing interim orders? For example, take an example of interim injunction. All of you know that, there are certain conditions. Now, what are the conditions for granting temporary injunction? For first is prima facie. Second is the balance of convenience. And the third is irreparable injury. So here what is happening, he's not considering the full case. He's not going into the merit of the case. So he's just authorized to only pass interim or the interlocutory orders. So in that case, obviously section 10 will not get attracted, because I'll again take you to the Bare Act provision. No court shall proceed with the trial of any suit. You can see with the trial. So he's not talking, section 10 is not talking about the institution. It is only talking with respect to the trial of any suit. So it bars the trial. Next, I told you that it is just the preliminary of the suit that is not to be continued with. So it only bars the trial and not the institution. Now coming to the next, what is the need for having concurrent jurisdictions for both the suits? I told you it is necessary both suits are to be suits. I gave you an example. Again, I'm repeating the example. If you file a suit for ejectment, another, you just go and start a proceeding for fixing the fair rent. That is, one suit is for ejectment and the other suit is a proceeding for fixation of fair rent. So here, the previously suit or the previously instituted suit talks about the suit, but the second, that is a subsequently instituted suit, is not talking about suit. It's a proceeding for fixation of fair rent. Sorry. So in that case, section 10 will not get attracted. Section 10 is referable only to a suit of civil nature pending in a civil court. So I told you that any matter which is expressly or impliedly barred by a statute or impliedly barred by a general principles of law. So, no suit lies for recovery of any cost in a criminal prosecution. Similarly, for an enforcement of a right on a contract under Section 23 of Indian Contract Act. So these are all impliedly barred. So you cannot go and invoke the jurisdiction of civil court. So I told you, even though the finality is accorded to the orders of the civil court, but you have to see that whether that the special tribunal on whom the special jurisdiction has been conferred has the power to grant the same relief or to grant the same adequate remedy which the civil court would normally do in such a situation or in such a suit. So if the answer is in the negative, then definitely in that case, even though the special jurisdiction has been conferred on a special tribunal, but the jurisdiction of the civil court is not barred. So these are all the criteria, these are all the conditions that you need to take into consideration while applying section 10. So I told you again and again, section 10 has to be read in conjunction with section 9 and section 26 subsection 2 of CPC that talks about the institution of suit. So institution of suit, you need two important requirement. The first is a cause of action and the second is a right to sue. So right to sue, every person has a right, and every person has the right to go and institute a suit, even though the claim may be frivolous, even though the claim may be, very trivial in nature. So the only criteria is that no expressly, that the jurisdiction of the court should not be expressly barred or impliedly barred. So that is the main criteria. Third, if the second suit is one which the first court is not pecuniarily competent to try, then section 10 is not attracted. I told you again and again that the jurisdiction is very, very important. And that is the need for having the concurrent jurisdictions for both the suits. Now going to the next slide. What is the purpose of res sub judice? What is the objective? Now, I didn't, take you to the purpose of res sub judice first itself, only because you need to understand the provision first. So, if you understand the provision first, automatically you will come to a conclusion that only for this reason, or this was the objective of section 10. So, the purpose why res sub judice was drafted. Now, what happens? Basically, section 10 is talking about any kind of pending suit. So once a suit is already pending in one court and the other suit is also pending in another court, definitely the latter suit will be stayed. And section 11 is talking about res judicata, that is when the matter is already adjudicated upon. So there is no pending stage. So section 10 takes within its ambit the pending stage of adjudication, and section 11, that is a res judicata, talks about the adjudication that has already, the matter has already been adjudicated upon. So what is the purpose? The first purpose is that it defends a man from multiple procedures and to prevent a conflict of decision. So it protects a person from multiplicity of proceeding. So what is happening? It is forbidding, or it is prohibiting or preventing the court from taking numerous judgment in respect of the same case, same subject matter, same cause of action, same remedy between the same parties. So it is just confining the plaintiff to one litigation. And thus it is obviating the possibility of any two contradictory verdicts that must be passed by the one and the same court in respect of the same relief. So there has to be an end to a litigation. Otherwise, you can understand. So here, what happens? You don't feel that this judge will give you the judgment, good judgment in favor of you. Immediately, you go and file another suit when another suit is already pending in a court. So that is what is happening. You don't have faith in the Indian judiciary system. So there has to be an end to a litigation. So you have to protect the person from multiplicity of proceeding and conflicting of decisions. Because it causes inconveniences to the parties. It furthermore defends the disputant people from irrelevant provocation, that you can understand. It additionally intends to avoid the burden of the parties and offers effect on the principle of res judicata. So when I will teach you the section 11, now basically section 11, the res judicata, is based upon three principles. First principle, the Latin maxim, nemo debet bis vexere pro iona iet idem causa, that no man should be vexed twice for the same offense. Then, interest republica ut sit finis litium. It is in the interest of the justice that there should be an end to a litigation. And res judicata pro veritate occipitur. So judicial decision must be accepted as correct. So these are the principle. Just to give an effect to the principle of res judicata, you have to avoid the burden of the parties. So you have to confine the plaintiff to one litigation. So that is the purpose of res sub judice. So my students, there is also another important aspect of res sub judice. Since you are already, you will read a CPC in details, you will find there is a provision of summary suits that is enshrined under order 37 of CPC. Then what is exactly, the summary suits? Now, Order 37, it talks about in details that, what is the procedure to be followed, in instituting a summary suit. For example, for section 125 CRPC, that you have to try it summarily. So all the summary trial has to be followed. So in the case of summary suits also, you need to do it very summarily. Now, what is happening, that the question is that whether section 10 applies to summary suits, the answer is no. Why? Because when you will start, interpreting order 37, when I will teach you order 37 in class itself, you will find that until the stage when the leave is granted and the defendant is permitted to defend his or her suit, the trial does not begin. So here what is happening, before such stage appears, section 10 has no application to summary suits under order 37 CPC. So if in prelims a question comes that whether section 10 is applicable to summary suit, so definitely yes, no, true, false, in that matter it will come. Unless and until whatever situation just now I gave you, I cited that until the stage, appears the defendant is, the leave is granted and the defendant is permitted to enter to defend the suit, the trial does not begin. So basically the answer is section 10 is not applicable to summary suits. Now, I hope my students, this session on section 10 is clear to you all. Do you have any doubts so far? Because after, taking your doubts, I will just go to the multiple choice questions that are asked frequently in most of these states. So I'm waiting for your doubts. Do you have any doubts? Please write yes or no in the chat box. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Nidhi. So we will discuss the multiple choice question. Provision of section 10 CPC are discretionary, mandatory, both, none of the above. So this provision is actually very good. B. Who has given this answer? Nidhi. Thank you so much. B is mandatory. Under section 10 of the code of CPC, the court shall not proceed with the trial of the suit if the previously instituted suit is pending. See this 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I will take you to the next slide. The answer is there. First, in the same court in which the subsequent suit is brought. So my students, I told you repeatedly, read the preliminary question very, very minutely. So what it is asking is, under section 10 of CPC, the court shall not proceed with the trial of the suit if the previously instituted suit is pending in the same court, in any other court in India, in any court beyond the limits of India established or continued by the central government, in any court before the Supreme Court. So let us see. A, 1 and 2, B, 3, 4, C, 2, 4, D, all the above. So the answer is all of these. So don't be in a hurry. So it is not 1. So I will take you to the Bare Act again. See, suit is pending in the same court or any other court in India, that is in the 1 option. Second option पे क्या है? In any court beyond the limits of India. Third option पे क्या है? Supreme Court. And just let us go to the multiple choice question. In any other court in India, so definitely that is applicable. In any court before the Supreme Court is applicable. 3 is also applicable. First is applicable. So the court shall not proceed with the trial of the suit if the previously instituted suit is pending in all of these. Okay. Under section 10 of CPC, a suit is liable to be stayed, dismissed, rejected, either A, B, or C. So section 10 talks about, the heading itself signifies the stay of suits. So it is stayed. Yes. Very good. 4. Section 10 of CPC does not apply when the previous suit is pending in the same court, when the previous suit is pending in a foreign court, when the previous suit is pending in any other court, when the previous suit is pending in the court. So you have already told you it is the whole. I mean the answer is all the above. Now, under the principle of res sub judice, the second suit has to be stayed, the previous suit has to be stayed, either A or B, depending on the facts and circumstances of the case, either A or B, depending on the valuation of the suit for the purpose of the jurisdiction. What is the answer? The answer is the second suit has to be stayed. So this is the way, the multiple choice questions are asked. Similarly, in mains also, I told you again, I'm saying the most important mantra for all the judiciary, aspirants is that the judiciary is not meant for meritorious students and overconfident students. It is only meant for those students who do hard work regularly. First, hard work. Second is determination, the vision. The vision has to be very clear. Your aim has to be very clear. And the third is the patience. So if you are patient enough to to digest all the things, you will face so many impediments. Sometimes you will you will feel panic. You don't feel like studying the same subject. You're feeling whether you will crack or not. So these thoughts should be kept aside. The first thing, if your vision is clear, so definitely that will take you to a step forward. So that is much more important, and that is the decisive factor. The hard work, regular hard work. You need to, the mug up. I told you it's very difficult. Most of the students say, ma'am, it's very difficult to, mug up the BERAC provisions. But my students, I will definitely tell you that if those students who have a, very remarkable mugging power, I'm not saying you have to mug up each and everything. So if you can start the mains answer with a particular BER provision, so that will definitely make your answer unique. So that is needed, some tactics, some tricks that needs to be followed while presenting your answer in mains. So we are all here to support you all. So that's all for today, my students. So thank you once again for patiently hearing me. So thank you. Good luck.